Thanks for joining me. I'm in the tiny village of Llangoedmor, which has a very interesting and very full churchyard. Many of the people buried here came from surrounding villages, and some of those commemorated on the monuments are actually lying very far from home. The churchyard was the burial place of many tradespeople and mariners from the nearby town of Cardigan. It is surprising that commemorated in this sleepy little place there are many who travelled the world, and some, sadly, who never came back, but having no grave for their relatives to visit, were remembered on the memorials to other family members. The Reverend David Thomas Jones was rector here at Llangoedmor for 1 year before his death, but before that he had a very interesting life. He started life on a farm, but after 2 years in the seminary at Lampeter, he sailed on the Hudson Bay Company's Prince of Wales to the Red River settlement in North America in 1823 to be a missionary. 5 years later he returned home to Wales to marry Mary Lloyd and took his wife back to North America. They had 6 children, and they led busy lives teaching in the school they built, the Red River Academy. Mary died in 1836 after childbirth, and the Reverend Jones was so stricken by her death he could not continue in his work. He returned to Wales with his 5 surviving children and became a curate and professor of Welsh in Lampeter. He kept a journal while he was in the Red River settlement, which still survives, and whilst he was there he was described as a fine and eloquent preacher, tender-hearted, kind, and loyal to a fault. He was all but idolised. This is the grave of Anne, the wife of James Johnson, coachman at nearby Llangoedmor Mansion, and her headstone remembers their son Edward, who also went to Canada, not as a missionary, but in the Royal Artillery. He died at Montreal in 1834. David Rees died in 1832. Also remembered here are 4 of his children, including David, who died at Sierra Leone in Africa in 1837, aged 23. John Matthias, mariner of Cardigan, died in 1854 in Rotterdam of cholera, aged 26. 2 adjacent headstones of mariners tell different tales. John Phillips died in South America in 1857, aged 29, and John Owens survived the perils of the sea and died in 1868, aged 76. This stone was placed to remember the children of John and Phoebe John of Kilbronagh Cottage. Tom, who died in 1882 at 10 weeks old. James died in 1891, aged 5. Mary died later in the same year, aged 2 weeks. Their son Thomas survived a little longer, dying in Newcastle, Colorado in 1915. A second stone remembers their daughter Nellie, who died in 1919, aged 23, and their son David, who we are told died in an accident in Ecuador in 1929, aged 34. The unlucky parents died in 1934 and 1935, in their 80s. Not everyone who died far from home left these shores. Griffith Davis died in Trehavod, Glamorgan, and Eric Lascelles, whose parents lived in a mansion in the next village of Llecryd, was a mining engineer who died in Rosedale Abbey, Yorkshire, aged 25. This headstone commemorates Elizabeth Ladd and her son and daughter. Her married daughter, Mary Lovering, died and was buried in Breconshire in 1849, aged 38. Their son drowned 8 years earlier when he was 17. An account of his death was in the local paper. Robert was in a leaky boat hauling up the anchor, and it sank. His body was recovered from the River Tyne near Cardigan Bridge. David Jones also drowned, but in Cuba in 1874, and on the same stone his father-in-law Owen Roberts is remembered. He died on board the SS Cloverdale on a voyage to Vladivostok, aged 61. Thomas Jones of Cardigan died when he was shipwrecked in the schooner Artois of Cardigan on the west coast of Scotland in November 1830, aged 43. The ship was wrecked off Craig Innes, and the 7 crew were buried at Dunhanais. David Phillips, also a mariner of Cardigan, was drowned a little closer to home off St Anne's Head, Milford Haven in 1811. Their son David became a saddler, altogether a safer choice of trade. There are many other mariners buried at Llangoedmor. but as well as another saddler, we find trades very much carried out on terra firma. Thomas Griffiths was the son of Thomas Griffiths, a cooper, and his unusually named wife, Dizzer. John Davis was a mason. David Evans was a slater. Thomas Griffith, a bailiff. John Lloyd was a land agent. Thomas Francis kept the ship in. William Amlott was a solicitor. T.G. Griffiths was a land agent and auctioneer. William Davis was the teacher of the village school, and he is buried just opposite the school and the attached schoolmaster's house where he lived. A great number of those buried here would have been engaged in agriculture, but farmer is rarely seen on gravestones. In fact, this example is the first I've seen. Usually the house name, which is almost always given, would have been recognised by local people as a farm. The other side of this monument has the occupation of draper. There are other drapers and a shopkeeper, and some blacksmiths. Apart from the numerous mariners, we find other occupations connected with the port of Cardigan, a sailmaker and a customs officer. Of course, all these occupations are those of men. Women are usually just described as the wife of or the daughter of, except Sarah Davis, who is simply remembered as a spinster. Some women did work, of course. This is the memorial to the children of William and Maud George, who were a married couple in charge of the Cardigan Union Workhouse, and this cross is to Margaret Thomas, who served the clergy of Aberdare, presumably as a housekeeper. Also a servant was John Evans. His epitaph proudly reveals he served Mrs. Webley Parry of Trevorgan and Mrs. Brigstock of Blind-Pant, and that he was a faithful elder at Capelmire in Cardigan. There were many nearby mansions, but few gentry tombs are in the cemetery. Some railed enclosures buried under brambles in the far end of the cemetery may be the last resting place of the local squires, but their memorials are mostly inside the church. Thomas Lloyd of Llangoedmor Mansion had a table tomb inscribed with an epitaph which tells us he was Lord Lieutenant of the county, a kind and affectionate husband and father, and beloved for his simplicity of manners, benevolent and respected for his integrity. However, according to Herbert Millingchamp Vaughan, who wrote the South Wales Squires, Mr. Lloyd was notorious in a free and easy age and society for the number of his bastards, several of whom, when they grew up, served their father in a domestic capacity at Llangoedmor. He is said once to have shocked a rather particular judge at the assizes by playfully pointing out to him that the coachman who was driving him and the footman in attendance were some of these illegitimate hopefuls. He was, however, reckoned generous towards a succession of mistresses, for he granted them all small farms or holdings on the Llangoedmor estate, on long leases at low or nominal rents. His own sons, born in wedlock, did not fare so well. In order to be spared the trouble and expense of keeping and educating them, the three young Lloyds were put out to walk like foxhound puppies on the outlying farms, and it was only after much entreaty from a neighbour that the eldest son and heir was at last sent to school at Rugby and was later allowed to read for the bar. A rather pithier epitaph is on the tomb of George Woolgar Griffiths of Panquin Mansion. "Life's but a dream and all things show it. I thought so once, but now I know it." This rhyme was written by the poet John Gay and is on his monument in Westminster Abbey, although the wording there is "life's but a jest." Mr. Griffith's widow has a rather more pious epitaph. Thomas Morse, the mariner and son of a customs officer we met earlier, has a marvellous epitaph. It's not very easy to read, but as far as I can make it out, it says, "On rolling waves when furious wind prevailed, his bark Eclair to foreign climes he sailed. There, far from home and friend, to dare for wealth, hard stroke of fate, he lost his cheerful health. Readings of death for many months he bore, his mind dejected in a distant shore, yet pressed on, and knowing all survived, to reach home, his friend, and there he died." Archdeacon North of Trevorgan Mansion was rector here, and his family is buried in a rather overgrown plot. He was a colourful character, once professor of Latin at Lampeter. He was keen on farming and wrote poetry in 7 languages. His infant children have unusual epitaphs which he may have written himself. Marked only by their initials, the diminutive headstones have a bird metaphor. 2 gentle nurslings each a while were cherished in the parent nest. One went, one came with angel smile, from all our grief the pang to rest. Abiding but to plume his wing, the name to lisp, the chanter say, he fled, and the once newborn king, safe in silence from the swain for aye. The very last memorial we're going to look at is the large granite obelisk you may have noticed at the start of the video as I walked up to the churchyard. It was put up many years after the death of the man it commemorates as a token of respect to David Jenkin Morgan, who was born in 1752, the son of a gravedigger, but joined the Pembrokeshire Volunteers and there learnt to play the clarinet, which changed his life. He later travelled all over Wales and became a famous musician and composer of hymns and the once popular anthem Teyrnasa Iesu Mawr. If you want to hear it, there is a link in the description, or search Teyrnasa Iesu Mawr on YouTube. Thank you to Sarah of Cleo's in Cardigan, who suggested I visited Llangoedmor Churchyard. It was certainly every bit as interesting as she promised. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be informed of new videos as soon as they're uploaded. So, thank you for watching. Diolch am wylio.